thank you for everything you do in our community. These groups are so important to our community, and what you do, we can't have a great community like we have without organizations like Kiwanis. So thank you. I can't talk without talking something about Roy Johnson too. I know everybody's doing this right now, but 43 years voice of the band, is that right? 60 years with the band. I spoke at your 50th reunion at Purdue. I've done several histories on the Purdue bands, the people in the Purdue bands. Roy Johnson is the history of the Purdue bands. There is no one who has been in the bands as long as he has. And we all love the I Am an American. The I Am American was only done for a few years before he started doing it. So he's done it all over the country, maybe even all over the world. I don't know. But this is really one of Purdue's real icons. So just thank you, both of you, for everything you've done. I know a lot of people here. A lot of people from my church are here. So First United Methodist Church. So we'll just hold a missions committee meeting after here, as long as we're all together. Tuesday night, I got to go to a banquet at the country club, and I got to hear Tracy Dodds give a talk. What a great talk! I hope she has spoken here. If she hasn't, you have to hear it. What a great story! Sports writers and sportscasters Hall of Fame in Indiana. One of the first women sports writers in the country, starting in the early 1970s when she was a student at IU. Just an incredible story, an incredible history. And my talk won't be nearly as good as yours was last year. All things come to an end, so that's just the way it is, and now it was time. I did write a column for almost 43 years. So as I look around here, there's hardly anybody in this room who's even 43 years old. So none of you were born when I started. But I do have a website in which I put new columns up sometimes, in which I have a lot of the old columns. And my cast of characters are on the bottom there. My wife Jean, daughter Jenny, and her husband Ken, son Nat, and his wife Lisa, our youngest child, and then the grandchildren going over there. So I have a good time visiting them. Some are in the East Coast, and we get to traveling around a lot. You wonder what you do when you're retired. I found out you go to the doctor a lot. This summer I got 2 new knees, 2 total knee replacements. So I'm up here, I can do a little jig. I'm doing pretty good. I told the doctor I wanted 2 things, the surgeon. I said, I want you to make me a better golfer, and I want you to make me taller. And I want you to know he failed at both counts, so I'm not satisfied. We'll have to talk about the bill later on. I'm talking about astronauts. This is not an astronaut. This is Anna. Anna is not quite 2 years old, and she is eating a chocolate muffin cupcake. Many people say that she takes after me. And I don't know why they say that when I look at her face like that. But she does know how to eat a chocolate donut. The reason I have a picture up here is because if you can hear my voice, I have a cold. And I got up last Saturday morning and I had to give a speech over at Purdue's. It was alumni weekend. And I went to talk to my wife and I said, I had no voice. So I had to work all day at trying to get my voice back up to get through that talk. So Roy didn't hear me shouting too much down in the field because I couldn't be heard. Today I have a voice, but I'm still struggling with a cold, so I hope you'll be patient with me. What I wonder is how such a sweet, innocent little girl can give me such a nasty cold that's lasted 2 weeks, But she certainly has. Now this is an astronaut. This is one of our astronauts, Jerry Ross. Does anybody here want to be an astronaut? Here you go. We got one right here. I ask you because there's a call out right now for astronauts. I give talks over at Purdue to students. I have never talked to a group of Purdue students that afterwards, at least one student hasn't come up to tell me he is at Purdue or she is at Purdue because they want to be an astronaut. That's why they're there. I guarantee you there are Purdue people getting ready to apply to NASA for the next class of astronauts. We don't know if they'll make it. It's a very select group. Just a few things about it. The pay ranges from $66,000 to 144,000, and you have to live in Houston. So that you don't get rich being an astronaut. You don't get rich. And if you're in the military, you just get military pay. The last time they had a call for astronauts, there were 6,300 applications. 6,300. How many did they take? They took 8. You think it's tough to become an astronaut? It is real tough. Just an amazing group. You have to pass a NASA physical. You have to be the right height. You have to probably, they say just a bachelor's degree, but in reality, you have to have a PhD pretty much or a master's anymore. And be well experienced in your field. It's really, really tough to be an astronaut. But if you make it, like Jerry Ross, you get to go out and walk in space. You get to go out in your spacesuit, in your own little spaceship, and be out there in space, all alone by yourself. And see the world and the universe and everything around you. And it's an incredible experience. And if you want to be an astronaut, you ought to go to Purdue University. How many astronauts went to Purdue University?
22.
23. 23. Here's 22 of them, and I'll explain that in a second. So, the people that are around the outside of this photo here, these are Cernan astronauts, all along in here. These people in here, Gus Grissom, Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan, Roger Chaffee. They came to Purdue, when they first got to Purdue, and walked around this campus. The word astronaut was not part of the common language. It was an obscure science fiction word. These people never dreamed of flying in space when they were at Purdue. But 16 years after Neil graduated from Purdue, he walked on the moon. I like to tell that to students at Purdue when they're coming to graduation. What are you going to do in 16 years? You don't know. You have no idea. What Purdue is here to do is prepare you for a future that we can't see. And I think we do a pretty good job of it. These guys in the middle here were the heart of the race to the moon. Project Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. 12 people have walked on the moon. Only 12 people. 2 of them are from Purdue. So that's about 17%. Not bad at all. And moreover, it's the first and the last person, Neil Armstrong and Gene Cernan. All these astronauts are very close to Purdue. They come back very often. This is the way they look at spacesuits when they flew into space. There we go. So, why does Purdue have so many astronauts? And by the way, people say, does Purdue have more astronauts than anybody else? There was a time when we had more astronauts than any non-military university. Okay? The Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy have more astronauts than Purdue. And there's one other school that right now has more astronauts than Purdue. It's a little obscure, they call it the Purdue of the East Coast, MIT. Okay? They have a few more. After this next group gets picked, maybe we'll be ahead of them. Right now, they're ahead of us. So I say Purdue and MIT have had graduated more astronauts than any non-military university. And if you group yourself with MIT, you're doing pretty good. Why did so many astronauts graduate from Purdue? Why? What's happened here? 5 reasons, okay? This will be on your test, so write these down. Number 1, we have one of the top engineering programs in the country, and we have since time began. We were started as an engineering school and an ag school, and both these programs are still incredible. We're growing our engineering program right now at Purdue. It's just a great engineering program. Number 1, engineering. Number 2, may surprise you, ROTC. Purdue has one of the strongest ROTC programs in the country. It historically has had one of the greatest ROTC programs in the country. Some of our ROTC groups have named number 1 in the country. Especially in the earlier days when people were just flying, before we had mission specialists. People who wanted to become astronauts came to Purdue on military scholarships, because they could be part of the ROTC program, and go on here and learn to fly. 3rd reason, engineering, ROTC. The 3rd reason, pretty obvious. We got an airport. Since the early 1930s, Purdue has had an airport on campus. People who like to fly like to have an airport nearby where they can fly. our astronauts just spend a lot of time flying in and out of there. Fourth reason, reputation. When Neil Armstrong graduated from Purdue, Gene Cernan, Gus Grissom, people knew these people went to Purdue, and if they wanted to be an astronaut, they said, well, that's the place to go. So we got a reputation for graduating astronauts. And finally, we had a program during the 1960s with the Air Force Academy. At that time, the Air Force Academy did not have any graduate programs. Their best people, after graduation from the Air Force Academy, came here and did a very intense master's degree program. And 7 of our astronauts came through that. But even though they came here to get a master's degree, they are still incredibly loyal to Purdue University. And by the way, we had one other person come to Purdue on that program. You know who he was? His name's Sully Sullenberger. Mean anything to you? The pilot who landed the plane in the Hudson. Just a tremendous, tremendous person. Another Purdue graduate who came to that program. 2 astronauts are active. This one here is our most recent. He is our 23rd astronaut. I couldn't get him the slide because I can't figure out how to put him in there. Scott Tingle, he has not flown into space yet. When he was chosen, he was one of 20 from 3,500 applicants. The other active astronaut we have right now, Andrew Feustel, he is our only non-engineer astronaut. He graduated in science. He's done 2 missions. One of them to repair the Hubble telescope, and it was amazing. He had to take a box out and put a new brain into the Hubble, basically. Put a new brain into it. And guess what? The lug nut was stuck. You ever had this happen? He's a mechanic, and he does cars, you know, and he said it was like when I was trying to get the lug nuts off my tires in the car, and I couldn't get it off. I had the same experience in space. We have at Purdue the Barron Hilton Flight and Space Exploration Archives. I couldn't get that all in there above, but this is a really amazing thing. A lot of our astronauts, a lot of other astronauts are starting to donate their papers to Purdue. We have the largest collection of Amelia Earhart material in the country. A lot of it is available online. You can just hop online and look at this stuff. Or you can go over there and research it. It's just amazing. So, let's have a look at some of these astronauts now. Now, that's not one. Believe me, they are going to give me a $450 million shuttle to fly in a $1.5 billion mission. That's what they cost. A few things here, you can look and see these seats. They're not that comfortable, but they aren't in them that long. And don't forget, when they first get in them, they're lying on their backs, aren't they? They're lying there on their backs. It's very uncomfortable. But they're within 8 minutes after launch, they're in space. So it's not like flying to Europe if you sit on it all day. They aren't in it that long. There are 2 seats in front there. This is the cockpit. 2 seats behind there. Down below, there's another deck where they can put 4 or 5 seats down there. As soon as they get into space, the seats come off. They take them off. The question the astronauts get asked the most, how do they go to the bathroom? And I tell you, first of all, when they're lying there on their backs waiting for launch, there's nothing. There's nothing for them. It's pretty much the same thing the nurses give you at the hospital. And once they get into space, Jerry Ross describes it as an outhouse with a vacuum system. And that's all it is. The shower is just a little curtain to go over when they shower. There's not a whole lot of privacy. They sleep downstairs in the lower deck. It's very crowded. It's a very small space. Not big at all. I say it is. It was. And to sleep, they strap themselves to the wall. And the reason they do that is because otherwise they'll float around and bump into each other and wake each other up. So I'm going to start with this guy, and he, you might not recognize him as an astronaut, but this guy's name is George Welch. George Welch is officially credited with being the second person to break the speed of sound. Who was first? You know, everybody knows this story. Chuck Yeager. But some people say that George Welch actually did it first. And he did it. The Army did not want him to do it, but he did it anyway. He put his plane into a dive, and they heard booms all over Edwards Air Force Base. And after that, they locked his landing gear down, so he couldn't get the speed up to do it again. But he's officially the second, maybe the first. This man is named Ivan Kincheloe. Came to Purdue in 1945. Ivan Kincheloe is known as Mr. Space. He flew the Bell X-1 up to the stratosphere, just to the edge of space. A Purdue graduate, and he would have been, everyone believes, the first person launched into space, but he died in a very obvious. They're all tragic, a tragic accident. He had his wife had a daughter. She was pregnant with another child when this happened. Of course, in those days they didn't have ultrasound and such. But Dwight Eisenhower, the only time this has ever happened, Dwight Eisenhower said that he wanted some president at some future time, if that was a boy, to appoint him to a military academy. It was a boy, but he didn't want to go. This is the man the astronauts modeled themselves after. If you look at astronaut behavior, kind of very calm, a little bland, it was his personality they modeled. I move through these guys quickly. Gus Grissom. Everybody knows the story of Gus Grissom somewhat. Gus Grissom went, after high school, did a little work, went in the Army, like everybody else at that time. The war was on. He got to the Army in 1944. He wanted to be a pilot. He was too late. He had an office job. He typed. Sat at a desk and typed. He would have worked in Mitchell, Indiana, in the factory down there making buses. But he came to Purdue on the GI Bill. The GI Bill changed the country. Absolutely changed the country. And I give a whole talk on that. He came here in 1946, graduated in 1950. In 1950, he saw a recruiter at the unions and said, I'm going back in. And he signed up to go back into the military, become a pilot. He did become a pilot this time. Went to Korea, was a hero there in Korea. Came back and was doing test pilot work out in California. October 1957, what happened then? Sputnik. So right away, the United States thinks we've got to send people into space. So they start looking for astronauts. They invited people to apply. Gus was one of the ones they invited to apply. He was one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, and you know this. He was the second American in space, the third human in space in 1961. He was the first Gemini commander. He was the first Apollo commander. You see a pattern going here? Many people say, in fact, not many people say, but the person who chose the astronauts, in what position they would fly, said that had Gus lived, he would have been the first person to walk on the moon. But of course, he died in January of '67 in an accident at the Kennedy Space Station. Before it was Kennedy Space Station. Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong, born in Ohio, moved around a lot as a boy. Was settled down finally in Wapakoneta. He comes to Purdue in 1947. He's already a pilot. He's here on a Navy scholarship, a Navy program. He only stayed a year and a half. Middle of his sophomore year, the Navy pulls him into active duty, sends him to Korea. Okay, he flies, missions there in Korea. Doesn't get back to Purdue until the fall of 1952. This is his band uniform. He played in the All-American Marching Band. One of the only people who was there before Roy. He graduated in 1955, January. He was not considered for the Mercury 7 program. Why? Because Eisenhower only wanted military people, and he was not in the military anymore. So he was out in Edwards Air Force Base doing a project called Dyna-Soar. Dyna-Soar. And it was kind of like a shuttle, actually. They were putting an airplane on a rocket and shooting it up. Same time, NASA was starting to do Project Mercury. NASA invited him to join the Project Mercury. He didn't know which way he should go, but he picked Project Mercury at NASA. It turned out to be the right choice. He flew on Gemini 8, had a terrible accident almost on that, but he was able to get it back home. He was selected to be the commander of Apollo 11. After the explosion of the Apollo 1, they called together 18 astronauts in a room and said, one of you will be the first man to land on the moon. We don't know which one. We're going to start with Apollo 7, and we're going to push each one as far as we can go. And when we think we're ready, we'll land. So we don't know who it's going to be. It'll be one of you. Turned out it was Neil. Gene Cernan. Gene Cernan graduated from Purdue in 1956. He knew Armstrong a little bit. He knew Roger Chaffee, who I'll talk about in a second, very well. He flew on, Neil was Gus was in the first astronaut class. Neil was in the second. Gene was in the third astronaut class. He flew on Gemini 9, again, right behind Neil in the Gemini mission. He flew Apollo 10. Apollo 10 did everything except land on the moon. He didn't get to land on the moon. Then they told him that he could do Apollo 16. But if you remember, they were starting to say, we're not going to keep flying to the moon so many times. We're going to cut this program short. And they did. Gene said, I want to be a commander of a moon mission. And they said, if you don't take 16, you might not get another chance. He said, I'll take my chances. He did, and he became commander of Apollo 17, the last person to leave the moon. That's his daughter, Tracy. And the reason I have a picture up there is because they had her on, I think it was an NBC TV show, while he was walking on the moon. And the reporter says, a lot of daddies, when they go on trips, business trips, come home, they bring their daughter a gift. Did your dad tell you he would bring you a gift? She said, yes. And he said, what did he tell you he was going to bring you? She said, I don't think I should say it. And he said, oh, you can tell. It's just me. You know, you can tell. And she said, he promised to bring me some moonbeams. Moonbeams. This is a photo NASA just released of Gene right after the moonwalk. You can see it's hot, dirty work. Roger Chaffee died with Gus on Apollo 1, January of '67. That's his wife, Martha. Martha was a homecoming queen of Purdue. And she told me, when you see Gene, you tell him something. I was a candidate for the military ball. And that was, anybody back here, those were big deals back then. I was a candidate to be a queen for the military ball. Gene Cernan was on the committee that picked that queen. And she said, I didn't get it. And I just want you to tell Gene, and I did tell Gene. And he says, a woman never forgets. She gave us our moon rocks. The shuttle program, a lot of these astronauts I pitched before, did the shuttle program, as I said, that went into space. It took, this moment, 8 minutes to get into space. It takes you more than that to get to work, doesn't it? But in 8 minutes, they were in space. The shuttles are now on display. This one is in Florida. One of the interesting things about them is they didn't clean them. They left them as they were when they came back, so they're kind of dirty. This is the book I did about Jerry Ross. Jerry Ross, one of our astronauts, is the most launched human in the world. There are something like 550 people in the world that have been launched into space. 550. About 360 are Americans. You can fit all of them in this building comfortably. Only one, well, I should have said 2 have been launched 7 times. Jerry and one other person. He's tied for the most space launches. He also has among the most space walks. He's just an incredible part of the space mission. There's Jerry, a very, very happy guy. When he was a boy, under 10 years old, in Crown Point, Indiana area, his dad was grandfather was a farmer. His dad worked in steel mills. He used to lie in bales of hay, and one night he told a friend, the friend remembers the story as well as Jerry. They were looking up at the stars on a summer evening, and Jerry said, you see those stars up there? Someday I'm going up there. And his friend said, oh yeah, sure. And Jerry said, no, I'm serious. Someday I'm going up there. And he did. 7 times. This is Jerry in the front there. Flying into space, of course, is a great accomplishment. Jerry credits his second greatest accomplishment. Came in 1966, when Purdue beat IU and got themselves into the Rose Bowl, and the students stormed the field, including Jerry, and took down the goalpost. And that is the goalpost going to Circle Pines Co-op. And Jerry puts his picture up now because he says the statute of limitations is over. Apparently say it. I had a wonderful time getting to know Jerry and talk to him. He's just an incredible, fine person as well as a great astronaut. And one morning I was down there on a Sunday. were both Methodists. We were going to his church, and he was downstairs before I was, and I heard singing downstairs, and I heard two voices. The first song was Jesus Loves Me. The second song was Take Me Out to the Ball Game, Cup Stop. So I heard, who was down there singing with Jerry Ross so early in the morning? And I went down and I found out his parents. Now, a parent singing Jesus Loves Me, evangelizing a parent, that's one thing. But these parents lived to be 70 years old. Turning a parent into 70 years of being a Cubs fan is beyond the pale. That can't be excused. I'm a Cubs fan, you know. I just come back from Israel. I found out in Israel that olive trees can last 3,000 years. I think, you know, there may be an olive tree on this planet right now that will live to see the Cubs win the World Series. Just quickly wrapping up. These are two interesting astronauts, Charlie Walker and Gary Payton, because they weren't really part of NASA. They were payload specialists who fly with the shuttle. Actually, Charlie Walker worked for McDonnell Douglas, and Payton was working for the Air Force when he did that. Some of our astronauts, when they're through being astronauts, go on to do incredible things. Most of the work in the space program, running it, is done by a company, or was done by a company called USA, United Space Alliance. These two guys, Mike McCulley and Dick Covey, were CEOs of that company. One of two female astronauts we have, Janice Voss. She applied to be in the space program 4 times. It was the 4th time she finally got in. You know, she was really getting discouraged. But on the 4th try, she made it. She ended up flying 4 missions. Unfortunately, she died in 2012, and she was a great friend at Purdue. David Wolfe, one of our astronauts, one has a Purdue degree in engineering and an IU degree in medicine. He was going to go to IU, but he came up here in August for a program, and this was in the 1960s, and they were talking about calculators. Those were new back then. And he said, if I come to Purdue, will you teach me how to make a calculator? And they said, we sure will. So we stole him from IU, and he came here. David not only did a lot of missions, he was on the space station Mir for a while. This is David Wolfe and another astronaut, Polanski, on the 40th anniversary, and I'm finishing up, the 40th anniversary of the moon landing. So this has been 2009. They held a big party in Washington, D.C. to celebrate. Neil Armstrong was there. Buzz Aldrin was there. Mike Collins, the one who stayed in the capsule and didn't walk on the moon, he was there.